A personal reflection on understanding self and others through a lineage of kindness. Number 1665, 5/31/2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Psychology, Behavioral Study. Life Reflection. Preface: I am back at my California home after visiting Mid in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Boston. During this 8-day trip, I continuously suffered from jet lag, averaging only 3 to 4 hours of sleep per night while producing more than a dozen research papers, which may have been partially driven by those sleepless nights. Nevertheless, I spent considerable time reflecting on many aspects of my life, including applying my accumulated knowledge of psychology and psychotherapy in the writing of 3 recent papers. Introduction. Looking back over my life, what strikes me most is not the schools, the success, the titles, the companies, the wealth, or even the research papers. What stands out most clearly is a pattern that has remained remarkably consistent from childhood until today. Since I was about 4 or 5 years old, I have always been a quiet observer. I was not the most outgoing child, nor the most socially active. Instead, I spent much of my time watching, thinking, and trying to understand the wonderful world around me. In school, I consistently ranked near the top of my class throughout my academic years in Taiwan. At the time, I did not think of myself as intelligent. I simply felt different. While many classmates were actively engaged with one another, I often found myself standing slightly apart, quietly observing everyone I met and everything happening around me. Growing up, when I came to America at age 21, I faced the usual challenges of language, culture, loneliness, and adaptation. I had no family support network, very few friends, and limited resources. In reality, I had almost no money and struggled to survive by taking whatever work I could find, including jobs in restaurants and cleaning toilets as a janitor. Throughout those first 10 difficult years, from 1969 through 1978, my wife remained my closest companion and strongest supporter. Looking back, I have often said that only 3 people loved me unconditionally throughout my life: my father, my mother, and my wife. My children love me as well, but they are primarily on the receiving side rather than the supplying side of that relationship. My professional success did not emerge suddenly. The underlying abilities were visible much earlier, but they did not become widely recognized until I reached my mid-30s. By my early 30s, I had already risen rapidly through the engineering ranks. By age 35, I became a vice president of a large engineering design company. Later, I became the CEO of my 8th startup venture and eventually achieved levels of business success that few people ever experience. At age 48, I was recognized as one of the top Asian American CEOs on NASDAQ. For many years, I believed that this success came primarily from technical ability, education, intelligence, and hard work. Today, I see the picture differently. I believe that my success resulted from extraordinary pattern recognition ability, a deep appreciation for learning, relentless self-education across 12 academic disciplines over 44 years of postgraduate level study, strong willpower, and unusual persistence. Learning to understand myself, I now believe that my interest in psychological observation and my natural pattern recognition ability played a significant role in my success. During my decades in both engineering and the high-technology industry, I worked with and managed some of the brightest people in the world. Many held PhD degrees from elite universities. They were highly intelligent, ambitious, analytical, and competitive. Even my major customers were filled with top-notch scientists and engineers. Leading organizations in such a high-level industry required far more than technical expertise. It required understanding human behavior through relentless self-study and learning it. Non-technical subjects, particularly intelligence, behavior, and the psychology of both normal and abnormal individuals. In many ways, psychology is similar to medicine. Physiology studies physically healthy people, while pathology studies disease states. Likewise, psychology studies healthy mental processes, while abnormal psychology, such as personality disorder, attempts to understand dysfunctional patterns of thinking and behavior. Throughout those years, I never stopped observing people. I quietly analyzed their family backgrounds, childhood environments, motivations, fears, ambitions, insecurities, loyalties, strengths, weaknesses, and interpersonal conflicts. I constantly asked myself why people behaved the way they did. At the time, I did not consider this psychology. I simply thought of it as trying to understand people. Only later did I realize that I had been conducting informal psychological observations for decades. My formal psychology journey began much later. I spent approximately 9 years self-studying psychology by purchasing and reading more than 300 textbooks and numerous published papers. In addition, I personally underwent about 3 years of psychotherapy with a Harvard-trained psychology Ph.D. after I sold my successful high-tech venture. That experience felt very much like giving birth to my own child, and then watching that child be adopted by another family and given a different family name. That experience felt very much like giving birth to my own child, and then watching that child be adopted by another family and given a different family name. The emotional loss was profound, and it took years for me to fully understand, process, and recover from it. Initially, I entered psychotherapy because I wanted to understand the emotional consequences of difficult business experiences during the 1990s, as well as the physical suffering associated with chronic diseases that were partially influenced by prolonged interpersonal and psychological conflicts between the senior industry leaders. However, that process gradually evolved into something much larger. I was not merely learning psychology. I was learning how to understand myself. My learning, one of the most important lessons I learned, was that human behavior often reflects adaptation rather than intention. When we observe a person who appears controlling, distrustful, overly ambitious, emotionally distant, or constantly seeking recognition and acceptance, it is easy to judge the visible behavior. It is much harder to understand the hidden wounds beneath that behavior. Most adult behaviors are often rooted in earlier childhood emotional injuries, whether physical, emotional, or frequently both. Over time, I began to realize that many human behaviors are survival mechanisms. What appears to be manipulation may sometimes be protection. What appears to be arrogance may sometimes be insecurity. What appears to be confidence may sometimes be a mask protecting an injured inner self. This realization significantly changed how I viewed both other people and my own life experiences. My recent psychology papers represent, in many ways, the culmination of that long journey. They were not written to criticize anyone. They were written to understand human behavior through a systems perspective. In some ways, they are self-awakening and self-reflection documents. The concepts of abandonment, distrust, and mask did not emerge solely from textbooks. They emerged from years of study, years of observation, years of therapy, and years of learning about others and self-reflection. Perhaps reaching nearly 80 years of age has helped me arrive at this more mature, calm, and objective perspective. Perhaps the most important conclusion is that understanding does not require agreement, and understanding does not require blame. As I grow older, the need to assign fault gradually becomes far less important than the desire to understand what truly happened and why it happened. Today, when I look back at the people who influenced my life, I see them less as heroes or villains and more as individuals following different life trajectories. Some trajectories were shaped by stability, support, and love. Others were shaped by abandonment, insecurity, and emotional wounds. Over time, those early differences often became amplified through decades of adaptation and reinforcement. Only a few individuals developed the insight necessary to see clearly through their own life experiences and elevate themselves to a deeper understanding of life itself. My psychology research began as an attempt to understand other people. It eventually became an effort to understand myself. In doing so, I came to appreciate that human beings are neither purely rational nor purely emotional. We are adaptive systems continuously responding to our environment, our experiences, our memories, and our relationships. There are number 100% saints and number 100% criminals in the real world. The same systems principles that I later applied to engineering, business, medicine, and chronic disease appear to operate within psychology as well. Stress, adaptation, compensation, amplification, and long-term deformation are not limited to bridges, machines, or human organs. They also appear within the human mind. Looking back, I now see my life less as a collection of isolated events and more as a trajectory. I do not primarily remember equations, formulas, or numerical tables. Instead, I see patterns, pictures, shapes, diagrams, and relationships unfolding across time. Perhaps that has always been the way my mind works. And perhaps that is why my journey through engineering, artificial intelligence, psychology, business, and medicine ultimately feels less like several separate careers and more like one continuous Effort to understand how complex systems evolve over time, including the most complex system of all, human beings, both body and mind. Conclusion: Professor James Andrews at Iowa and Professor Norman Jones at MIT contributed to my growth not only through engineering knowledge, but also through their kindness toward humankind and their willingness to help people in need. As for certain individuals who created difficulties along my life journey, I maintained a strong desire to understand why and to find answers. I no longer hold negative emotions toward those people because negative emotions only produce negative results. Someone once told me that living well is the best revenge. However, I do not wish to think in terms of revenge. I would rather say that living a healthy and peaceful life while helping others is my chosen lifestyle. I have learned that, regardless of whether an encounter is positive or negative, maintaining a positive attitude and a loving, kind heart toward others ultimately leads to the best outcome for myself over time. This approach has consistently brought peace, understanding, and positive endings to my life. This realization ultimately brought me a sense of closure. Episode: An unexpected connection to Africa. Just this evening, after returning home from my trip to MIT, I watched a short video that unexpectedly touched me deeply. The speaker was a young PhD, born and raised in Tanzania, and received his PhD from National Taiwan University. During his graduation speech, he described how he had been inspired and be helped as a child by Jane Goodall. That inspiration and assistance motivated him to pursue education despite many obstacles. Eventually, he earned a doctoral degree in Taiwan. What moved me most was not his academic achievement. What touched me was his stated goal. He hopes to return to Tanzania and help build schools so that more children can receive an education and improve their lives. His experience and dream are highly similar to mine in America. Yes, I saw a remarkable chain of human influence. A young woman in England, Jane Goodall, her work and assistance inspired and helped a child in Tanzania. That child became a PhD from University of Taiwan. Now, he wants to help future generations of African children. At that moment, I found myself unexpectedly becoming another link in that chain. For more than 30 years, I have supported educational programs and scholarships for underprivileged students, more than 10,000. Education transformed my own life after arriving in America at age 21 with no money, very limited resources, and zero personal connections. Because of that experience, I have always believed that education remains one of the most effective ways to change a person's destiny. Professors Andrews and Jones changed my trajectory and destination. After watching this video, I immediately asked my personal assistant in Taiwan to help locate this young Tanzanian PhD graduate. I hope to speak with him personally and learn more about his vision. If our goals and values align, perhaps we may be able to work together to help children in Africa receive educational opportunities that they might otherwise never have. I was especially happy to realize that a dream I began many years ago, helping underprivileged students through education, might one day extend beyond Asia and America into Africa. If such an opportunity becomes reality, it would represent not only a continuation of my lifelong mission, but also an expansion of that mission to another continent and another generation of children. Whether or not such a collaboration eventually occurs is not the most important point. What matters is the realization that a single act of kindness may travel much farther than we ever imagine. Jane Goodall likely never imagined that her work would inspire a child in Tanzania, who would later inspire an elderly Chinese-American medical researcher living in Silicon Valley of California, whose own life had been profoundly influenced by an American professor at Iowa and a British professor at MIT. Sometimes the most meaningful contributions are not measured by wealth, titles, publications, or recognition. They are measured by how many lives are positively influenced through a chain of kind heart, learning, knowledge, ability, hope, opportunity, and more kind hearts that continues long after we are gone. I hope that the values of humanity, compassion, and service that have guided my life can continue through future generations and extend across national boundaries. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.